Okay, good morning. My name is Virginia Solis Zucker, and I am a faculty member at the University of Minnesota, and I have the honor of introducing Dr. Barbara O'Neill. And I'm going to introduce her first, and then I'll talk about the title. Dr. Barbara O'Neill is the owner, CEO of Money Talk Financial Planning Seminars and Publications. This is where she writes, speaks, and reviews content about personal finance. And if you've been a member of AFCPE, you have seen Barbara over the years, and she's done lots of presentations, excellent ones too. A distinguished professor emeritus from Rutgers University. She has written over 190 articles for academic publications, and she's received over 35 national awards and over $1.2 million in grants to support her financial education programs and research. She tweets about personal finance information. She writes weekly posts for her Money Talk blog, and she's the author of Flipping a Switch, a book about 35 later life transitions published in 2020. And so our topic today, and I love seeing the birthday cake up there. Happy birthday, it's your 70th birthday. Our topic is, anyway, I'm going to get the title right, Money After 70, Key Issues for Clients. And if you'll help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Barbara O'Neill.
Okay, very glad to be here, and kind of ironically, tomorrow is my birthday, so it's like, oh, okay, good timing. Okay, so I'd like to start with a couple of questions. How many of you who have clients who are age 70 and above? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have parents that are 70 and above? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you are age 70 and above? Raise your hand. Okay, not so many. When I put the proposal in for this session, I emphasized that this is a topic for many generations, because even if you're not 70 plus yourself, you are working with clients or you have family members who are in that age demographic, and you may be called upon to assist them. Okay, so with that in mind, let me ask you another question. What do you think are the biggest financial concerns of people age 70 and above? Yes. Running out of money is one. What else? Needing a nursing home or some type of long-term care. Yeah. Cost of health care, medical services. Anything else? Okay, preserving assets, maybe leaving a legacy perhaps. Yeah. Okay, the needs of kids. You're leaving, yeah, one more. Solo agers, we're going to talk about that too. So you guys are right on point. I reviewed a number of surveys. I should say, by the way, that this is an abbreviated version of a class that I do for 90 minutes at the nonprofit foundation where I teach in Ocala, Florida. And so you're kind of getting the cliff notes for it. And all the slides are available for you to download off the website too, so you'll have this version of the program. And I asked the question to my adult students, and I get some of the same answers. And then in preparing the presentation for my students, I looked at a lot of the research. And this is what a number of surveys say. Actually, the number one fear of older adults is running out of money during your lifetime. But other financial concerns that kind of arise when people become septuagenarians or octogenarians or nonagenarians, if you make it to your 90s, managing the RMDs, we'll talk about that, having maybe higher income taxes and fewer tax write-offs, so you're paying more income taxes in later life, loss of spousal income and married filing joint status for taxes upon widowhood, the needs and wants of children and grandchildren. Of course, everybody fears stock market downturns, but particularly when you don't have as much remaining lifetime to rebound from a big downturn, that's a concern. You all mentioned medical issues, long-term care is another concern, and somebody mentioned legacy planning, charitable gifting, that sort of thing. So those are what the surveys say. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this research. There was a psychologist decades ago. I think this research goes back to the 1980s or late 70s. Bernice Newgarden. She came up with this concept of 3 phases of aging. And rightly so, because you can't expect a 65-year-old to have the same needs and characteristics as a 95-year-old. You know, there was always a tendency to kind of lump them together and call them the elderly. But that's not the case in real life. People have different needs and concerns as they age throughout later life. So Bernice Newgarden classified older adults in 3 categories. Young old, ages 65 to 74, old, 74 to 84, and old, ages 85 plus. And actually, 85 plus is the largest, fastest growing demographic in this country percentage-wise. So people are living longer. So then in the 1990s, there was a financial planner, Michael Stein, and he decided to put his little spin on the same concept. So he wrote a book called The Prosperous Retirement, and in that book, he talked about 3 phases, but gave them slightly more catchy names. So go-go years, which corresponds to the young old, slow-go years corresponds to old, and no-go years for the oldest demographic. And you can read more about it. When you get the slides, you can click on this link to Michael Kitz's blog, and there's a whole description of this terminology. So just a couple of background things before I start to talk about specific things that relate to personal finance for this older demographic. You know, one of the things that people need to be aware of is factors related to life expectancy. So there's a chart there that shows that at age 70, on average, a male can expect almost 13 years of remaining life, and a female slightly over 15 years of remaining life. Okay, so we know that women tend to live longer on average than men do. But what I always tell my students is that you really need to look at personalized life expectancy calculators. You know, not the general one like the Social Security Administration has, but a really good calculator. There's several of them. Living to 100 is one that comes to mind off the top of my head, where people answer a number of questions about personal characteristics. Have you ever had cancer? Has anybody in your family ever had cancer? Do you smoke? Do you wear seatbelts? How much sleep do you get? You know, how much physical activity do you get? All those kind of personalized questions. You're going to get a much better estimate of life expectancy than something that's just very general based on the whole U.S. population. So we talk a little bit about life expectancy. How many of you are familiar with David Planchett's research on the spending smile? Not too many. Okay, so this is new information. Okay, so this is from an article that he published in the Journal of Financial Planning 10 years ago in 2014. And he looked at data on spending. You know, the government keeps really good data, the Consumer Expenditure Survey, and there's other reports as well. And he plotted the spending of older adults through various phases of life, okay? So looking, again, back at the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. And by the way, I am a go-go married to a slow-go. So sometimes there's a little challenges with that because go-go's want to do more than the slow-go's want to do. Anyway, what he found is that he called it the smile because, as you can see, in the go-go years, you're spending at a higher level, tends to fall down and trail off a little bit during the slow-go years, and then often rises in later life because of expenses related to health care and long-term care and things of that sort. So that's another interesting factor as background information. And then the third thing to keep in mind is that more and more older adults, age 70 plus, are still working. Either they're continuing their primary careers into past their age 70, or they're leaving a primary career, and in my case, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm running my own business, or some people are, getting gig type of jobs, lots of things that people do. And actually, the fastest growing demographic, percentage-wise, not numbers-wise, in the U.S. labor force is people age 75 plus. So who knew? So, I mean, older adults, the 85 plus are the fastest growing demographic, period, and then older adults, 75 plus, are the fastest growing percentage-wise portion of the U.S. labor force. So I kind of start the class with my students just kind of level setting a little bit on some of these demographic statistics. Okay, and then from there, I go into 20 specific topics that relate to personal finance at age 75 plus. So let's dig into them. So the first one is Social Security. And I'm sure you all know that once you reach age 70, there's no point in waiting to claim benefits because the delayed retirement credits end at age 70, and why not claim the benefits? You're not going to get any more money by waiting any longer. But if people do wait to age 70, they receive 132% of the benefit they would have received at full retirement age with all those delayed retirement credits added. I will say, though, I did some research with colleagues when I was still at Rutgers, and we looked at what experts recommend and what people actually do, and we divided up all sorts of, financial tasks, and I chose Social Security. And what we found out very clearly is that, so many financial experts are saying, wait for the big payout. But in reality, less than 5% of Social Security beneficiaries wait until age 70, so it's a pretty small demographic. One thing that I do want to point out, though, is for people who do continue working age 70 plus, they may continue to get boosts in their Social Security. And I'm a perfect example of that. I had some Social Security credits, obviously, when I was a teenager in my early 20s. And then when I worked for Rutgers Cooperative Extension, I was enrolled in the Civil Service Retirement System. So no Social Security was taken out of my pay. Instead, they took out the CSRS, 7% of my pay. However, in 1992, I started Money Talk, and I had my side hustle. So I was able to qualify for Social Security, but as you all know, benefits are based on the 35 years of highest earnings. And let's just say I didn't have big earnings with Money Talk when it was a side hustle because I had a day job, and of course my earnings weren't very big when I was a teenager. So what's happened the last 5 years since I've taken Money Talk into a full-time enterprise is that I only had 32 years of service, the credited service. I had my quarters because I had 10 years, but I didn't have the full 35. So the first couple of years that I operated Money Talk full-time, I replaced out those zero earning years. And now I'm replacing out the years that I was a teenager. And I'll work my way up through my early 20s. So the point is that if you continue working and your earnings in your later life years are greater than what they were when you were younger, like particularly your teens and early 20s, they're going to take the 35 highest earning years. So now when I get Social Security, I get two adjustments a year. I get the adjustment when they finally get the tax return from the IRS and catch up with my latest year's income. And then I also get the COLA that everybody gets. So something to keep in mind if you have older clients, they may be able to boost their Social Security through their later life earnings. Okay, and then there's required minimum distributions, or RMDs. So we all know that RMDs are required. They're mandatory, and they're taxed as ordinary income tax. If you've made pre-tax contributions and you've let your money grow tax deferred for decades, the IRS is saying, hey, I want a piece of the action there. So anybody who was born between 1951 and 59 has to take an RMD at 73, and anybody born 1960 or later under the current Secure 2.0 Act will start to pay RMDs, or take out RMDs, I should say, the withdrawals, at 75. Okay, so and this chart was from Michael Kitz's blog as well. So, this is something that's going to happen when you're past age 70. So people have plotted RMDs as almost like a waterfall, because what happens is that as your age increases, the divisor decreases, and the percentage of your account balance that is taken out as a withdrawal increases. So when you plot it on a graph, it's like a waterfall. It just keeps going up, and then it kind of peaks somewhere around, early 90s or so, because at that point, the account balance has been depleted, has been withdrawn on for 20 years, and it starts to go down. But, look at the divisors there. When you're 73, you're going to be dividing 26.5 into the account balance on December 31st of the previous year. By the time you live to 120, they think they're going to live to 120. They've made this chart go that long. The divisor is 2, which means 50% of whatever you have left at age 120 is going to come out as your RMD. And you can see on the slide, too, the percentages. When you first start taking your first RMD at 73, you're taking out 3.77% of your account balance. But by age 85, it's 6.25%. If you live to 100, it's over 15%. So that's where you get kind of that waterfall graphic that I discussed. Okay, number 3 on my list is the mindset of the young old. These are our go-go people, the early 70s. Remember I said 65 to 74. So people start wondering in their remaining go-go years, how much time do they have for good years? And by good years, I mean you have vitality, you have mobility, your health is good. And there's so many things that people want to do. You have a bucket list. You want to travel. Maybe you want to continue to work or volunteer, and you have hobbies and sports and entertainment things. So there's a tendency for people to want to pack as much as possible in those remaining go-go years. So people tend to have a lot of activity. So of course what that means from a financial planning standpoint is they're probably going to be the highest expenses. That's why the smile starts up here and eventually goes down. So many people in their early 70s, guilty as charged, have an accelerated bucket list. You just want to get so many things done while you know you have the health and vitality to be able to do this. So I just encourage my students to enjoy this time, because this is your time to do this. I don't know too many people who have better health when they're 85 than they had when they were 65. Tends not to go that way. Which leads me to the next transition, is the transition from when a person crosses over the line, kind of step over, from being a young old to a young old to an old, or a go-go to a slow-go. And of course, this is going to happen somewhere in the mid to late 70s. So somewhere during that decade between 70 and 79, people are likely to kind of make that transition. Sometimes it's health issues. People may have health issues, or their spouse has health issues. Often they lose their travel companions as a result. So sometimes their travel kind of goes by the wayside, or they cut back. Different activities they may cut back on. Less active socialization methods. So I always say, poker instead of pickleball. We've had so many people in my community injured playing pickleball. So people do tend to spend less money. That's what we know from David Blanchett's research with the spending smile. But the good news on that is that that can be good for people financially, because if they are spending a little bit less, it helps them address the issues related to inflation, where the property tax bill is going up, and their auto insurance and homeowners insurance. So if you kind of naturally cut back on some items, it does give you some money to help address some of the inflation issues on your essential expenses. Okay, number 5 on my list is new first-time expenses. Now, some of these can start before age 70, but for many people, it's age 70 and beyond that people have these new expenses. Hearing aids, walkers and wheelchairs, dentures. Maybe people get to the point where they just can't care for their lawn anymore, so they hire a lawn care service. I see that a lot in my communities when women are widowed and the husbands took care of the lawns, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to push the mower or drive the riding motor, so they hire a lawn service. So that's a new expense. Housekeeping expenses, kind of the same thing. Some people may need home health care services, whether it's home care housekeeping or home care where they provide physical care services, or even in some cases long-term care. Financial and estate planning services. This is the time when people tend to get serious about estate planning. And their finances often become more complex when RMDs kick in and, taxes become just a little bit more difficult to prepare on their own. And then other expenses that sometimes kick in that people wouldn't have had earlier would be things like the IRMA surcharge, that higher premium that people pay for Medicare. About 8% of Medicare beneficiaries pay the IRMA surcharge on top of the standard premium. And there's actually 5 tiers of IRMA. And then the net investment income tax, if people have multiple streams of income, that might kick that up as well. And then there may be other changes as well and other expenses that people have. Okay. Last and roll calculations, what does that mean? Well, roll is an acronym for return on life expectancy. So let me explain this one. In my book, which by the way, I have 1 copy left, if anybody's interested, see me after. In my book, I have a chapter with this title, Green Bananas, Roll Calculations, and Last. So what does that mean? Well, when I was in my 40s, mid-40s, and my mom was in her mid-70s, I was living up in New Jersey, and I would come down and visit my mother maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year. And somewhere in my mid-40s and her mid-70s, she started using this term. People my age, we don't buy green bananas anymore. And I'm saying, Ma, what are you talking about? She said, well, you never know what's going to happen. I said, Ma, you really mean that you don't think you're going to live long enough for a banana to turn yellow, right? And it was just a phrase that she and her, cohorts were using. And, I was, midlife. I didn't understand what she was talking about. But I get it now. When you get older, when you're 70 plus, your time orientation drastically changes because you realize that, I already showed you the life expectancy figures, you realize that you've lived a whole lot longer than what you have in remaining life expectancy. So in the chapter in the book, I talk about return on life expectancy calculations, like thinking, how long is the car going to last? How long am I going to last? And people do that calculation a lot with pets. If I get a pet and I'm age 75, what happens if I die before the pet? So that's where I talk in the book about you need to have contingency plans. You need to have somebody lined up to take care of your pet and then set aside some money, of course, to give them, funds to be able to do that. So this is just this change of mindset that older adults have. So it's a lens. So again, those of you that are midlife, I was there too, and I didn't understand it, but I do get it now. People start weighing things in relation to how long will I last, how long will the item last. And, this can tie into lots of different things. It's almost like people start getting into exit mode. And I get that, too, because my husband and I are planning a change 9 years from now to move into a life care community. So we're already in exit mode in some ways, saying, okay, well, as long as we can get through the next, 9 years, we won't have to worry about replacing the roof. Let somebody else do it. So people start making those calculations in relationship to cars. And then the other thing that they do is they start thinking about last. Will this be my last cruise? Will this be my last car? And, sometimes if you think it's going to be the last thing, you want to make it the best thing, the best car you ever had, because it could be your last car. So those are kind of the things that are running through people's minds. And then, of course, spending down. The first chapter in the book is all about that. If you don't spend your money, somebody else will. But it can be very difficult psychologically for people who have been save for decades to all of a sudden think about decumulation and taking money out of their accounts. It's not natural. They've been frugal for so long. And particularly for us, because not only have we been telling everybody else to do it, but we've probably been doing it too because we're walking our talk, right? So I can vouch for personal experience. It's very difficult to switch from being a saver to a spender. But people will have to do that, you know, for different reasons. First of all, the RMDs will require it. And maybe people will decide to do some charitable gifting. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, of course, the health care and long-term care expenses come in as well. But it is very difficult to make that psychological switch from saver to spender. Another thing that comes into mind is simplification and downsizing. So for a number of reasons, people start thinking about, okay, how can I make my life simpler? And particularly if they're planning a housing change to a smaller dwelling, they'll probably have to do this. But some of the tasks that kind of relate to this that you might suggest to clients, you know, gifting, selling, or donating their stuff, you know, particularly if they're moving from a large house, let's say, to a small townhouse or apartment. Creating a financial notebook with important data. Some of you that were in my session yesterday, that was one of those spring cleaning activities that I talked about. Closing subpar accounts, you know, if you have investments that just aren't performing. Maybe doing some tax loss harvesting before the end of the year and using those losses on those accounts to offset gains on other accounts. Consolidating like assets, I talked about that yesterday as a spring cleaning activity. You have multiple IRAs, kind of consolidate them. And then, of course, shredding a lot of unnecessary documents. I mentioned housing considerations. So as people move from 70 and on, there are a number of reasons where their housing decisions might change, their housing, where they decide to live. Could be health issues, it could be widowhood, could be loss of income. I see in my neighborhood a lot of widowed individuals. They immediately almost want to go back to family where they're from. So they leave warm and sunny Florida and end up going back to Michigan or, you know, wherever they're from, Jersey. But they want to do that to move closer to family. I've seen some family members in my own family that have had multi-generational housing. So they have 3 generations living under one roof, kind of like the Waltons. Some people have shared housing with friends, with boarders, significant others, if they don't share with family members. Reverse mortgages often come under discussion, or sale leasebacks. We have some of those in my 55-plus community where somebody's adult child turns 55-plus, so they're, you know, legal to buy in that development, and so they buy the house from the parent. They become the parent's landlord, and the parents get the income from the sale to help pay their expenses, and they get to stay in their same house. And of course, you know, their landlord is their adult child. So it works out really well if you have good family relations, I should admit. Assisted living comes into play, also continuing care retirement communities. My word about continuing care retirement communities or lifetime care communities, those are where you pay a pretty substantial entrance fee, usually from the proceeds of the sale of your house, and you move into a facility that will provide you a continuum of care for the rest of your life. So it's usually your final place that you go. You enter as an independent living person, and should you need assisted living services, memory care services, or skilled nursing services, you are all on one campus. So we're doing that. And actually, it came from this class last year when I was teaching it. One of my students asked, well, if you go into one of those facilities, what's the wait list? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to find it out because my husband and I wanted to do that. So the one that we're going to go into in 9 years is affiliated with University of Florida in Gainesville. And they have 200 people on their waiting list, and they turn over 20 units a year. So we chose to go out 10 years just because we don't want to move from where we are right now. We're too young. And it'll work out really well because they should be ready for us when we're ready for them. But you have to plan ahead. Another big issue is increased risk of diminished capacity. And this is a big financial risk. And as you can see from the chart, this is from an article in the Journal of Financial Planning. And let's see if I can explain. The dark blue line is Alzheimer's. The orange bars are other dementias, and the light blue is MCI, or mild cognitive impairment. And it does increase with age, and you can see on the chart that when you get into the mid-70s, all of those things significantly increase. And I've seen that in my community. I've lived in my 55-plus community for 5 years now, and over those 5 years, I've seen that happen with some of my neighbors. So, you know, it's something that people need to be aware of, make sure that they have estate planning documents into place, and, you know, have plans to help deal with some of those issues. Portfolio longevity and investment time horizon. So by the time people get to age 70, they could have been post-career. Notice I don't use the word retirement, so post-career, maybe 3 years if they left their job at 67, or even 15 years. You know, some teachers and public service employees can often leave their jobs at age 55, so they would be 15 years out from a career. So they, you know, depending on their retirement age. But, you know, the thing is, when you get to age 70, you're not going to have as much time for market rebounds as you would if you were a younger investor. But I always stress this to my students: your investment time horizon is the remainder of your lifetime. So even if you're 70 years old, you could live to 95. You can still have an investment time horizon of 25 years. So I often suggest to my students that they just periodically reassess where they are. There's a number of good Monte Carlo simulations online, or they can work with a financial advisor to have some of those performed. There is this guideline that's out there that suggests how much stock you should have in your portfolio, and it's based on your age and your risk tolerance level. You may have seen this. If somebody is conservative, 100 minus their age, so 100 minus 70 would be 30%. If they're moderate, 110 minus their age, and if they're an aggressive investor, 120. But what I always say to students is you got to tweak this rule. It's not set in stone, and there are situations where people could change it. For example, if somebody has a very generous pension and they have guaranteed income sources, either from a pension or annuities, that pay all of their expenses, and they never have to withdraw any money from their investments other than RMDs that are required, they could possibly be a little bit more aggressive. And actually, there's some research to suggest that when people have an increasing glide path and actually take on more stock in their portfolio as they get older, it stretches the life of the portfolio. But it's counterintuitive for a lot of people. And then, you know, people have to look at their risk tolerance level. Obviously, you wouldn't do that if you wouldn't sleep at night because you know, the market is doing its thing. Okay, income taxes. So there's going to be a higher taxes on higher taxable income once those RMDs start at age 73 or 75. And there's no way around it. It's taxed as ordinary income. Where it really starts to hurt is following widowhood. You know, when you have a couple and one of the spouses dies, in the year of the death, they can file married filing jointly, but following that, the surviving spouse would be filing as a single. And the problem is that the triggers for various things for single taxpayers are much lower than married filing jointly. So for example, in the 12% tax bracket, you can go up to $89,450 this year and be in that bracket. But before you go into 22%, but only $44,725 for a single person. So that's kind of depressing, but what I always tell my students is that there was a recent article, some research that was published in Journal of Financial Planning, that said that even though this widow's tax, they call it, that's the term that's often used to describe this phenomenon, the widow's tax, even though people may be paying more taxes as a result of widowhood, the research found that it was pretty much counterbalanced by a reduction in expenses, you know, because obviously there's less travel, maybe less food, so it's not as bad as it seems. So I always try to, give my students the positive spin. So I'm giving you the positive spin. And then, of course, the other thing, too, is if you have a single taxpayer as a result of widowhood, they will likely come upon the trigger points earlier, because again, there's lower incomes to trigger these things. The Social Security benefits tax, where you have to pay tax on up to 50% or 85% of your what they call it combined income, or you hit the triggers for the IRMA surcharge for Medicare or the net investment income tax. That's that 3.8% surcharge on Medicare. And that comes in at $200,000 for a single person, $250,000 for a couple. So again, single people will hit these things at lower incomes than couples will. Legacy planning becomes really important. The phrase, you can't take it with you. It rings a whole lot more seriously to somebody who's older than somebody who's, midlife. Especially when people that realize that they have enough, if they've done some Monte Carlo simulations and they've seen really good success rates of not outliving their money. Very often what will happen is people who maybe have been doing some charitable gifting, kind of like lukewarm donors, they might decide to step it up in later life and give more to their favorite charities. And there's different ways to take advantage of income, have some tax advantages to some of this charitable gifting as well. So it's part of a tax planning strategy as well as a philanthropy strategy. So bunching, how many of you have taught about bunching, where you try to get enough itemized deductions in 1 year to exceed the standard deduction amount? Usually that takes a significant amount of charitable gifting, because they have that $10,000 cap on your SALT taxes. So even if you paid property taxes of $30,000, like some of my Rutgers colleagues did back in Jersey, you're only going to be capped at the $10,000. So it usually takes a pretty good amount of charitable gifting to be able to itemize your deductions. So you need to have a plan for that. Some people will establish donor advised funds, or they'll gift appreciated securities, or even set up some charitable trusts. So there's different ways that people can do the charitable gifting. Also, QCDs. How many of you have heard of QCDs, Qualified Charitable Distributions? Okay, some of you. This kicks in when somebody reaches age 70 and a half. So you might remember that back in the day, RMDs were at age 70 and a half, and then they started rising. They were 72, and now they're 73 and 75. But they left the QCD age at 70 and a half. So once people reach that particular age milestone, they can direct the custodian of their, it's only for tax traditional IRAs. You can't do it for 403Bs or TSP or anything like that. It's only traditional IRAs. You direct the custodian to send the money directly to the charity. And that money that you give to the charity is not a taxable withdrawal. You just have to be really careful on your income tax returns. There have been articles about the fact that tax preparers don't catch it, and they report the complete withdrawal, and they don't take into account and subtract the amount that goes for the QCD. I've done a couple of QCDs, and they're really easy to do. The custodian just handles all the transfer. It goes directly to the qualified charity, and you get an acknowledgement from the charity, if you need documentation for the IRS. Okay. There's also the concept of financial gap years. I don't know if you've heard this phrase. This is the time period between 59 and a half and when somebody has to start taking RMDs. So 59 and a half is significant because that's the age, once you reach that age, you don't have to pay a 10% penalty on withdrawals from tax-deferred accounts. So you basically have a period of 13.5 or 15 and a half years of a financial gap period before RMDs begin. So this is a really good time for tax planning, particularly if people's incomes are lower before RMDs kick in. A good time to consider things like Roth conversions, sale of savings bonds, doing the QCDs, taking some capital gains on investments in taxable accounts. So you want to kind of do those things when your tax bracket is lower. So, get those things kind of out of your portfolio, if you will. So if you do the QCD, that's a traditional IRA that you're not going to have subject to RMDs later on. Okay, and then age 70 plus is the time for serious long-term care planning. Not that people can't do it before age 70, and many people do buy long-term care insurance in their late 50s or sometime during their 60s. But there's different ways. I do a whole class on long-term care, but this slide just talks about some of the options that people have. Okay, that's 10? Yeah, okay. I don't have my glasses on. So some of the options people have are purchasing a long-term care insurance policy. Sometimes the older adult will purchase it. Sometimes their adult children will purchase it to protect their inheritance, so to speak. Self-insurance through earmarked assets. So if people find out that the cost of skilled nursing in their area is, let's say, $100,000 a year, and they want to assume they could have up to 5 years of needing coverage, needing skilled nursing care. They might say, okay, 5 years, $100,000, and they kind of wall off $500,000 in their portfolio just to cover potential long-term care expenses. And then if they don't need it, it becomes an asset for either people or charities, whoever the heirs are to their estate. So that's an option. Some people are able to self-insure through their guaranteed income sources if they have a good pension, if they have, annuities, things like that. I've already mentioned the CCRCs, where you could move into a continuing care retirement community or life care community and pay that big entrance fee and the monthly expenses and have your care taken care of. Some people plan on relying on the government, Medicaid, or their family members. I've had students in my classes, older adults, tell me that they haven't talked to their family members. They're just assuming they're going to take care of them. I really don't think that's a good strategy. And then even worse is the ignore the risk and hope that you don't need care. And what the stats say is that 7 out of 10 older adults will need some type of long-term care during their lifetime. May not be necessarily a nursing home, but it might be at-home assistance, assisted living, something like that. 7 in 10. So the odds are good people are going to need it. It is possible to get long-term care insurance as late as age 79, but it's very, very expensive and very health dependent. They're obviously going to do a medical check to see what your health status is. Okay, a couple more. Communicating about hard topics. So this is the time to, if people have been postponing conversations about their end of their life, to talk with their trusted family members and their personal representatives, their trustee, their executor, talking about things like bequests and end-of-life care and caregiving expectations and burial wishes. I advise my students to do what I did. I created a who to call, what to do list for my husband. So he has a bulleted list of everything he needs to do if I predecease him. And then also a letter of last instruction where you can put things in like your funeral and burial wishes, your untitled personal property, who gets grandma's pie plate, who gets your stuff, outstanding debts, instructions for your pets, all those kinds of things. And then solo aging, somebody mentioned that. The average age of widowhood in this country is 59 because some people do get widowed at, relatively young ages. But the chances generally really step it up during your 70s and beyond. And over 50% of women aged 70 and above have ever been widowed. And of course, the survivor in a couple where you didn't have any children becomes a solo ager. So I have a whole chapter in the book just on solo aging and some of the things that those folks can do. I mean, they really need to build up strong social capital, possibly rely on professional advisors a little bit more than people that have children to help them out. So there's all sorts of implications for widowhood and solo aging on taxes, I already mentioned, insurance, that sort of thing. Here's another one. People who are 70 plus, their credit score generally goes down. And it might not have anything to do with, having debt or, going out on a wild spending spree or something like that. Some of the reasons where older adults tend to have their scores go down would be they would have a reduced mix in the types of credit, because often they don't have mortgages anymore. They may only just have credit cards. Some may have some student loans, but that's pretty, older adults usually by 70. Hopefully they've gotten those paid off. And then also sometimes they start using credit cards as much, so the files kind of get stale. There's no recent history in the usage of particular credit cards, so that could be an issue. And again, it's all based on the algorithms that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And then here's another one. That's a picture of my husband, by the way, when he turned 75. And right around the time he turned 75, we got an umbrella policy. You know, our policy was due for renewal. And it went up significantly, and I called the agent, and I said, what's going on here? You know, we haven't had any issues. And apparently for vehicle insurance and for umbrella, the rates go up when you hit either age 70 or 75, depending on the insurance company, because their statistics show that older adults tend to be in more accidents and they tend to be more prone to injury. You know, they have more significant injuries if they are in an accident. So it's just like the young adults, you know, the 20-year-old males, you know, their stats say they have more accidents. Same thing on the back end as people get older. And of course, we all know life insurance and long-term care insurance premiums go up as well. So I did this class, and they always evaluate all the classes, and I have really good students. I love them. You know, they give me good marks. But the first time I taught this class, I did have one student who said the subject was a bit depressing, but important. Made turning 70 as a difficult age when it could be really an adventure. So I've taught the class several times since, because I teach it twice a year, because there's always people turning 70, right? It's like you have a pipeline. So I'm going to end on a positive note, just like I end my classes. So some of the good things about being age 70 plus, you know, you're not dead. You're getting a good return on investment from all the FICA taxes. You know, my brother passed in January. He was 69. He got a little bit of a return, but, you know, not as much as somebody who's going to live for decades longer. Slower pace of life, fewer responsibilities. You have time to do things that you want to do, traveling and hobbies, socialization. You've got financial wisdom after decades of experience and resilience after decades of challenges. And for many people, the joys of grandparenting and even great-grandparenting, and opportunities to mentor people and share your wisdom. And more importantly, older adults have perspective on what really matters in life, that sometimes younger adults don't have that perspective. So I'll end it up there. I don't know if we have a minute or two for questions. And I thank you for coming. And feel free to use the slide deck if you can use it in your own work or share it with your older adults in your life. Feel free to do that.
Dr. Neal, in regards to the amount you can withdraw from your accounts to not run out of money, do you have any suggestions? I know there was, according to your life expectancy, according to the 4% rule. I'm not sure what your opinion is on that.
Well, I mean, what research shows is that for many people, once they hit RMD age, the RMD withdrawal amount becomes their de facto withdrawal for the year. Because they have to take it out. There's no choice on that. So that's what the research shows. There's a number of different methodologies people use. Some use the 4% rule, some tweak the 4% rule. There's been some research, if you've seen the Guyton and Klinger research, where they talk about guardrails, where you adjust the withdrawal percentages for market conditions. So if the markets are doing well, you might take a little bit more than 4%. If the markets have a downturn, you might take less. You know, a lot of people don't like that because it, you know, kind of crimps your style when the market goes down. So there's different strategies that people use. Some people just do it as a budget, as a spreadsheet, and just look at their expenses. I always recommend to all my students to do a pro forma tax return every year and just look at the changes from, you know, the current year to the next year and see if there's anything there that will change your income. So there's different ways to do it. I don't think there's just one methodology. And there's calculators too. There's actually a calculator online, How Long Will My Money Last? And it has some of those data inputs to do that.
So my question is with the CCRCs, the continuing care retirement communities, is there industry regulation that's going to make sure that that place is solvent in 10 years?
Yeah, most of the states have agencies that are providing oversight over that. The other thing that's really good to look at for CCRCs is their debt ratings. So the one that I'm going into at UF is a Fitch rating. Fitch is one of the rating services for debt on CCRCs, and it has a Fitch rating of A. So that's pretty good. It's kind of like bond ratings. I mean, AAA would be the best, but A is decent. Kind of an investment grade CCRC, if you will. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's on Amazon. Flipping a switch. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Okay, good point. Gentleman said 529 plans would be another place that people might want to look into funding. And of course, for people who are working age, another great place that a lot of people are doing retirement savings these days, if you have a high deductible health plan, is through your HSA. That's another option as well, because they're actually triple tax advantaged. You know, they're like the golden, you know, the golden grail there, if you will. But again, you have to have a high deductible plan to be able to, you know, access those.
Okay, we're past time. Thank you so much. If you have questions, please come up, and thank you.